so no worries. It's okay. We're just free flowing. Okay, thank you so much for coming on, Tracy. Let's see. Okay. Welcome to Weaving Sacred Stories. You just put out, maybe not just put out, but you have a book out, Mind Over Magic. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that is
Okay.
correct.
And yeah, you are deep in the world of magic and folklore and everything spiritual in that sense.
hmm
Uh, can you tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what is this book?
So my name is Tracy Nicholas, and I'm an author and I'm a podcaster, and I am an active member of a coven. I've been practicing magic for over 40 years at this point, probably longer, but I wouldn't have called it magic then. Yeah, so I have written a book about whether or not magic is real and how we can scientifically prove some things that we would have considered to be magic 10 or 20 years ago that are really provable by science. And so I also look at the psychology of magic, why we believe in it, why we want and need to believe in it, different stories from throughout time about what we believed and from around the world. And so it's really just sort of it's not super academic. It's accessible, but it really does get into some of the different scientific discoveries that we've made that explain some of what we think to be magic.
That is so interesting. What does the word magic, like what's your definition of the word magic?
It's changing the environment either within you or around you without any mechanical intervention.
And that brings me that like for me what comes up is this word manipulation.
hmm
Um and we kind of have a bad connotation with that word in culture and in society to be able to like manipulate your reality.
hmm
Um what what are some examples of what manipulating your reality like looks like
hmm
and how can we kind of come into more of a right relationship with that word?
Well, I'm going to use an example that is most people will have heard of. Probably everybody listening will have heard of it. The placebo effect. And so you have some condition that they're going to treat you for, right? You take a pill that is completely inert or some, type of medical, whether it's an ointment or whatever, but it does nothing at all. And your brain says, "Oh, I've taken medicine that will heal me." And so without changing anything real that, giving yourself anything real that will cure you or change the condition, your brain just heals you, just decides to heal you. And so I think that, that is, like, how is that not magic, right? Like, you decide energetically in your subconscious that you're going to be healed, and so it happens. Now, a really interesting thing that most people don't know about the placebo effect is that it will work even if you know that it's a placebo. And it doesn't work quite as well. It works better if you don't know. But the very act of taking the pill, like even a ritual that small, of just taking a pill, your brain says, I know when I take a pill, something changes in me. And so it works. So that tells me that ritual itself is so important to the human condition and to what we can do with our energy. So I think that's the best example I can give you that everyone would immediately know.
Yeah, and it's the power of belief in those moments, right? And so what are some of the things that we know in history people believed? Maybe you have a specific lineage or a specific ritual or a specific group or myth for us, but that really showcases like these people believed this, they embodied it, they went through ritual, and what they saw on the other side, proved even further, deepened their trust with their belief. What's something that comes up for you around that?
Well, I think that, again, with a common example, I think if we look at superstition, right? And superstitions are something that, people believe in strongly. And even to this day, if in Ireland, we'll just take Ireland. I think Iceland does this too. But in Ireland, if they're building a road or building a building and they find evidence that there is a place that the fae, the fair folk are, that they will build around it so as not to disturb it. And most people will tell you, like, no, I don't really believe in fairies, but why take a chance? And yeah, so, and again, putting on my folkloring hat, I don't think I mentioned in my introduction, my podcast is called Folkloring. And it's about bringing folklore and magic into your day-to-day life. And so as a folklorist, it doesn't matter to me whether or not a belief is true or a practice is true. What matters is that people believe it. And I think that as a magical practitioner, I think that you're right. It does matter what our mindset is and what our beliefs are, because you can't do something that you believe is impossible to do. And the very weird sports example I give of this is it was once believed that it was impossible. They had done measurements and scientific calculations. They did not believe that a human being could run a mile in less than 4 minutes. This completely could not be done based on the limitations of the human body until some British guy did it, right? And it was by a couple of seconds, right? But in the next couple of years, it was broken over and over in shorter and shorter times because people suddenly believed that it was possible. And so, like I said, you can't do something that you don't believe is possible.
Yeah, and this gets a little bit like interesting, right? Because scientifically, it feels there can be these limits or these boxes on the more academic side or more of the scientific side. And belief and energetics feel boundless in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
When, for example, when you were talking about Ireland and the fact that they don't want to disturb the Fae, you have a whole group, a whole community of people that are believing this. And what's to say that this group's belief energetically is not creating something with their belief that they now are interacting with? And I don't know, I guess that's just really interesting to me. Science can only take us so far, it seems. I mean, what do you
Well,
think about that?
I mean, what you're describing is really an egregore, which is a thought form, right? So a group of people believe something, and it becomes energetically a real thing. And so if there's a lot of factors that have to do with it. If it depends on how long they believe, how strongly they believe, how much they talk about those beliefs, if there's ritual that goes along with those beliefs, all of that adds into the energetic kind of thought, right? And so there's a lot of different definitions of egregore, and some believe that it's just sort of this communal belief system that is shared, and so that's what the reality is, and they start to share emotionally. Some people believe it is a sort of semi-independent form that, because when there is an egregore amongst a group of people, it alters their behavior. And whether it's because they're all believing the same thing together, or whether there is an actual outside entity formed that is influencing the group, there's a lot of different beliefs there. But that's a thing that is it's a real thing. And
The chick or the egg.
yeah, exactly. Well, and I think that we can go back to the science that and not in a limiting way, because if we look at, we know we exchange energy, first of all, right? If you go to a concert, right, and it is great, and like the crowd is really energized, like we've all felt that, and it just builds amongst people, right? So we know we can use energy to change things within our body. We know we exchange energy with other people because we've all experienced that. And so then the question is, like, how do we use our energy intentionally to affect other people? And what the science tells us, if we look at quantum physics, there's a thing called quantum entanglement. And this is not new science by any means. Like Einstein called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance. And, we've known for 100 years what this is, and people have been studying it. And so what quantum entanglement is that if you are connected to someone, like through this conversation we're having right now, we are connected physically on the quantum level, on the subparticle level, right? And so when people talk about things like, oh, I want to cut energetic ties, it's not just great symbolism, right? And again, the symbolism does help your mindset, right? But what to do about actually cutting those energetic ties is to strengthen your quantum entanglements with other things, right? And the less you focus on that person that you want to get away from, the more that those entanglements will drop away as you develop other things. And that can be to people, to animals, to something in nature, to objects, like whatever it is, those quantum entanglements will be the ones that are most strongly connected to you, and the others will fall away. So doing the ritual, again, very important. And that will help your mindset focus on, I have cut the ties, I don't have to think about that person anymore. And then you start to build your entanglements elsewhere, and those entanglements that you don't want naturally fall away. So the science supports it too.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I feel like quantum physics is the only, like, it's one of the only parts of science that I've actually, like, okay, yeah, this explains magic, like, to the T. Um, what came up for me just now is, what I've noticed in mythology and legends, and like even that Irish example of like the Fae, is that these people are also building these quantum entanglements with the other side through these stories, through their words. But I see how it enriches that community's life, because they're also like infusing a lot of what you might call um not commandments, but laws, tenets of like respect and honor, and like what, how we can honor the land, and um their way of weaving, like, it's not an awful thing for a whole community to believe this story if it's woven with intentional, conscious energy.
Right.
So where does it get sticky when we believe something? Where does it get to be harmful? Because there's always that shadow aspect to a story.
Well, I think that we tell stories about things that are important to us. And a lot of our folklore from around the world is either morality tales or cautionary tales. And so those stories are told to inform proper behavior, right? And even when we're talking about like the church, right? Like those rules, the Ten Commandments are in place. And most religions have that, like it's basically don't be a big jerk, right? Don't kill people, don't cheat. Um, and so, we tell those stories in all religions, really. Even when you look at paganism, right? Like there are a lot of people that believe in the rule of three, and so there's the reed where right. So there are a lot of those belief systems. I think where it can get sticky, as you put it, is when people are obsessive, they become overly rigid with those kinds of stories, and then they want other people to believe their stories, or at least say they believe their stories, and go by those morality rules rather than saying that's not my value system, and then they try to force them, and that's where we get, a lot of wars have come out of that exact thing. Like, you must believe, and a lot of brutal killings. You look at the witchcraft trials, right? And so I think that is one of the bigger problems, is trying to force your believed system onto other people through violent means when it does become extreme. I think that would be the worst example that I can think of. There's also shaming and judging, and there are a lot of ways that I remember one time I had, what's that, the group of people that walk around and try and get you to join their religion. It was one of those.
Yeah.
And so it was two women and like a young girl, right? Like tween maybe. And they start doing their pitch. And I said, oh, I'm fine. I'm a pagan, so that's not my... And the woman audibly gasped and like drew her daughter to her. Like I was about to send Satan after them. It was
Yeah.
hilarious, right? I also think, and of course I did that every time after, just to see what the reaction would be. And until we get to lockdown, and then it's really not happened again. So yay for that aspect of lockdown.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
and the amount of fear that you're encountering in people when you're outwardly expressing your own belief system, especially if you're not being tyrannical about it. Maybe you're walking down that road in Ireland and someone's talking about the Fae, and maybe you don't believe it, but nobody's gonna, make you believe what they believe. They're simply just expressing their culture in a sense. But what do you think that is, that fear? Where do you think that comes from?
Well, I think that a lot of people are indoctrinated early on into the major religions, right? There aren't all that many people being indoctrinated into the pagan belief system because, first of all, every pagan believes something a little bit different, right? And I think that's true for all religions. Every religion is a religion of one because you bring your experiences, what you've been taught, but those kinds of indoctrinations normalize some magic and villainize other magic, right? There are people 100% believe when they are going to take communion that actually turns into the blood of Christ and, the body of Christ, right? Which is why I always call Christianity a vampire zombie cult. Um, and but that is like, that's magic, right? Like it's not, and even if you look at the book of Psalms is a spell book. It is 100% a spell book if you look at it. So those things are normalized, and then they're vilifying things because, look, there's a spectrum. There are complete and utter skeptics. There's like none of that is real, will never be real. And then there are true believers. It's all real. Give me your fairies and unicorns and elves and dragons, right? But most of us are at some point on that spectrum. We believe in some of the stuff, we don't believe in others. And so I think that you're never going to convince the skeptics because they have a vested interest, right? But where people drift toward the skeptic, going back to the shame that I was talking about, is that these extreme versions, like nobody is going to wave a wand and have a bag of money appear in the middle of your altar, right? And so it's easy to make fun of those kinds of things because they're ridiculous.
Yeah.
But when we start to look, like we talked about energy work, and if we look, people make fun of, or they used to, I don't know if they do anymore, not in my world, they don't, but they used to call people like tree huggers, like if they were into being out in nature and stuff. Well, we vibrate at a certain level, and it's somewhere, I think it's somewhere between 7 and 18 megahertz or 7 and 20 megahertz. And within that range, we're fairly healthy, right? If we start to get too far to one end or the other, that's when illness starts to happen, right? And so we're around electronics all the time. And electronics vibrate at a very high frequency comparatively. And so if we're around them all the time, it starts to pull our vibration up. And when you get too far up in your vibration, you start to experience anxiety, insomnia, those kinds of things. And so we need to bring ourselves back down. Well, guess what? If you go out into nature, the trees, the plants, even the earth itself vibrates at a lower frequency. So that helps bring us back down. Now, we don't want to get too low because then we get depression and things like that. But, we know that. This is just like there's an electromagnetic field or a gravitational field. There's a morphogenic field, which is a vibrational field. And we know it. We've known this for a long time. And we know we can measure the vibration of the human body, and we can tell what the vibration of the earth is, or the trees. And so this is all, again, really clear science on stuff that we, like, people are like, oh, raise your vibrations, like it's some big woo-woo thing. It's like, okay, no, it's real. And you don't always want to raise your vibration, right? If you're trying to go to sleep, you don't want to be vibing at, and 11 a.m., I just finished my latte kind of vibration.
Yeah, I love the way we had a conversation before we filmed today, and I remember you saying that in our pre podcast phone call about the vibration thing, and it really resonated with me because I'm someone who really values root work and ancestral healing and going into the earth, and I love those things, but I've also been someone who understands that life is also very musical, and sound has always been, I've always loved just sounds, and those are vibrations.
Yep.
And I have always, and going back to quantum physics, I remember in class they were talking about it where nothing is truly solid and that everything is actually vibrating. And so I've always kind of been, I think, in the middle on this subject around frequencies, is that, I think it's both important to connect yourself into the earth. I think that we're here to have a human experience. That being said, I also think there's a lot more going on and we don't know everything and a lot of it's hidden, but it seems to be vibrating, which is very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about vibration, it's really an oscillation, right? And for us, it is an oscillation of an atom, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why we're vibrating, because those atoms are oscillating, and we know that. And I think that when we think about it that way, it's like, well, of course we're vibrating, right? And everything in our body is run on electrical impulses. That's how we move. That's how we think. And so, it makes sense that making sure that your vibration isn't interrupting that is, again, a way to stay as healthy as you can be.
Yeah, and it sounds just like, balance in your life. And so what would you say to those watching that might feel like they always have to be in a certain frequency or a certain state of being to either receive love. I mean, you hear this all the time. It's like you have to be in a certain way. You have to be a certain way to get the blessing or manifest your dream reality. You have to be in a certain frequency. What would you say to those people that are maybe on that path that might not know what's really going on underneath the surface?
Well, do your work and practice is the short answer. And because you can get thrown off by other people's energy, and if you haven't been sort of practicing grounding and centering and shielding when you're just within your own energy, when you run across an angry cashier, you're gonna get thrown off, right? Or you get in a fight with someone. And so you have to know kind of your own energy first. So that's, where you start, and it's, practice, practice, practice. So you can recognize your energy and when you're being affected by someone else's, in a positive or negative way. And so I think that other than that, you so if you want to, let's say, attract abundance, right? And whatever that means, but you're like, but I'm poor and I don't have a great job and I don't know when that situation's going to change, then, you turn your energy to where you maybe are abundant, right? So you've got a great partner and they make you feel filled with love, right? And so focus on that because it comes back in part to mindset and saying, I am deserving of abundance. And, for some people, if you're not like me and you haven't been doing shadow work, you got to do that because we get a lot of stories when we're growing up about how we are and who we are and what, I'm lucky or I'm unlucky. And we tell those stories and we're told those stories. I was told, I'm not athletic and because I tended to read a lot, because I liked reading a lot. And so you start to internalize those stories and we learn a lot from stories. And we take them in, and oftentimes we forget that it was a story, right? And we retain the lesson, but we don't remember that it's just a story. And stories aren't necessarily true, even if they're stories that you're telling to yourself. So you have to examine those beliefs. And so say you think, my intuition is not good. I never have, intuition that ends up being correct. Well, you might examine that and find it's not true, right? If you start to pay attention to like, oh, I noticed this little thing. And so paying attention is really important because if you just sort of go with the programming we've been given, the world, everything around us tells us magic is not real, right? So start to notice magic is one of the first things. Be observant. But then I think that if you examine it, and I say, yeah, you know what? I looked at it and my intuition, not that great. And then I can say to myself, my cat says hi. Hi, Puck. So is there another story that you can tell yourself that is along the lines of, I can get better with my intuition? And then that's your mindset, because it's not just about like when people are like, oh, manifestation, right? It's like, that's not about vision boards and such, right? It is about organizing your thoughts to impact your behaviors in the mundane world. You have to have both. You can't just say, I'm going to manifest abundance and then sit around and, binge watch Netflix all the time. Like you have to do something then. Start your business, write your book, do whatever it is, go out and learn, get a degree in what you want to do, what's going to make you happy. And I think that that's where manifestation falls so short for me because, like I've been talking about, the mundane is magical, right? It's all one thing. And so you can't ignore half of what you need to be doing out there. Like doing something like writing a book or getting, a new degree, right? That's part of the magic. Like that is part of the rituals, as it were.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with what you're saying. I think that that's also where manifestation falls short for a lot of people. And even like journaling and getting your mind in a good place is just half the work, because then you have to actually, okay, well, what am I going to do with this energy now? Um, and so, yeah, I think manifesting is also about living your life. And
Right.
what do you want, like, how do you want to live it? And also to your points around practice, um, practicing our life, practicing our life, like what are we going to do with our lives, and what does our everyday look like that sets us up for a long term, um because, like, and like a lot of people who might have practices or rituals, is that sometimes you might do a practice or a ritual and have a lot of magic and energy behind something, and it's not till 6 months later or a year later or 2 years later that you actually see that magic paying off.
Right.
um, and so there is an element of like divine timing, but also working with the elements. Do you do a lot of work with the moon cycles in your coven?
Yeah, we have a full moon ritual every month. And if there is, we also do, rituals for that correspond to the wheel of the year. And so if it's like a new moon or if it's waxing or waning, we take that into account in those rituals. For myself personally, I typically do a road opener spell on the full moon to sort of utilize that energy. And that has always been really effective for me. And there's a very specific ritual that I learned a while back. So yeah. And, as far as the elements, we incorporate that all the time, and depending on the rituals we do, if the weather is nice, we do it on a rooftop that overlooks Lake Michigan or even at the beach itself, because we're only a couple doors down. And so we're always seeing, unless it's cloudy, we see the moon, but we see the water, we hear the water. And so, we see the trees rustling in the breeze around us and we feel the wind. And so, we do a lot of elemental work, incorporating a lot of elemental work into what we do as far as ritual goes.
Yeah, do you feel like that plays a really big part in, you know, utilizing magic to enhance your life? Like, I feel like it's so much of manifestation is working with the elements. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And again, putting my folklorist hat on, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. If you're using that symbolism, that is very effective as well. And now, if you would ask me, am I a believer? Yes, I am, very much so. And I think that, again, take what works for you. And because every magical practice incorporates everything you've learned, everything that's happened to you, everything you've decided, and you have to utilize all of that. And when you were talking earlier about connecting to the land, I think that it's really important to note that if you like having all of the chalice and your cauldron and your athame and all of those things, rock on, have fun with that, right? But if you don't, or you feel like you can't afford it at this time or whatever, that is so unimportant, because magic historically has been whatever it is that is available to you, right? And if you're out there foraging, that connects you to the land. Now, we don't do that much, and we don't have a lot of those practices. A lot of people don't have gardens and things like that. And so we do get disconnected from the land. And I think that There's another important theory that I want to bring up. I want to get it right. So there's a man named Lee Smolin, and this relates to the morphic resonance I was talking about earlier. And there is a great book called Morphic Resonance by a man named Rupert Sheldrake. So if you want to get more into that, it's a deep dive. It's very interesting stuff. But anyway, this man named Lee Smolin, who is he is a quantum physicist, right? And so he came up with this idea called the principle of precedence. And basically what the idea behind it is that when things happen, right? The vibrations sort of hold what those activities were, and nature learns over time, right? And so later events are affected by what it has learned in earlier times, which interestingly would explain the Mandela effect, right? It's like, no, like things changed in the world because nature learned. And so it's a really interesting theory that, like things like that can morph. And so when we talk about different timelines and stuff, it's like, yeah, no, it was just different. And now it is a new thing.
Yeah, so like in the intelligence behind magic, do you agree that there's a bigger intelligence that, I mean, people might call it source or God or whatever, but something about magic in particular and the intelligence of just the nature of the world, there seems to be an intelligence behind it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a polytheist. So right now I'm working with Hecate and Pan. And so that's, my little god altar. And I really enjoy the energy. I really enjoy the idea. In my coven, we work with Frau Holda. We work with Tubal Cain. We work with the ancestors. And we work with the young lord, you know, Morning Star. So, and sorry, Lucifer Morning Star. And so I work with a lot of different deities. And I do think that there is a single kind of overarching, I don't know if I would call it intelligence, but an energy that is sort of on a higher plane that we all kind of connect to. And for me personally, like, I have a brother, and his name is John, and that's what I call him, right? He's got 3 kids, and they all call him Dad. They didn't in that one period of teenage years that they wanted to call their parents by their first name, but they call him Dad. And they have a very different relationship with him than I do, right? And to me, it doesn't matter that they call him Dad, and it doesn't affect my relationship with him in any way, shape, or form. So you want to call that energy Jesus or God or the goddess, like that doesn't affect me. And I am perfectly happy to go with whatever people's language is, because I know what they're talking about, and what they call it doesn't affect me negatively. And I don't get people who think that it does. It's like, if I don't worship your God, there's a problem. Like, it's the same thing. It's just different names, and again, different experiences and different relationships.
Mm. And oh, I love this conversation so much. I love deity work. I think that it's one of the most like it really can enrich your life and bring in a lot of abundance actually to connect, because you kind of have to go within yourself and figure out what resonates with you personally. And so it's a very empowering journey to pick a deity to work with, to connect to that intelligent energy. And I completely agree. I think, when this is all said and done, we're all worshiping and talking to the same intelligent intelligence. So I don't really care what people call it either. But it is very smart. And so it also is parental in ways. I've felt different energies that you work with that help to hold you and guide you. And I think that's ultimately what a lot of us are seeking is a sense of belonging.
Mm-hmm.
Um, how do you feel about, working with deities, and do you think that a lot of people would really benefit from opening up their minds to that line of work?
Yeah, I mean, even if just at the level of the stories, because the different deities have different personalities and different traits, and they're associated with different things and foods and colors, and it's really interesting to learn about that and why you're called to study a particular god or goddess at a particular time, and what it is that it's bringing to your life is, I think, really important work. I don't know, I mean, and that's just on the learning side. But if you're drawing in that energy, it's again a particular mindset. If you are feeling like things are bad in the world right now and you want to fight against people who are hurting other people through greed and selfishness, you're going to want to work with someone who is fierce and powerful and and there are a lot of gods and goddesses, well, particularly goddesses. They're called dark goddesses, and they have good and bad aspects. They're not evil, but they are associated with things like death or war, and but sometimes you need that energy.
Absolutely. And it's so true that it's so particular to you and where you're at in your life and on your own path,
Yeah.
which is why I think that it's such an empowering journey to go on. Also, I think it's still very taboo. I think we're not quite, I think we're getting there, but it's pretty taboo to be openly working with deities in
Yeah.
2026. Um,
Well, me personally, I tend to work a lot more closely with my guides, and my ancestors, right? Right behind me, I have an ancestor altar. And I think that that's more of a, like, my best buds kind of thing, And that's a day-to-day ongoing conversation. Now, I have ongoing conversation with Hecate and Pan. I give offerings, I thank them, I am studying, and but like with the other deities I work with, that's really only in ritual. We invite them in, we thank them. It is an ongoing relationship, but again, it's not as much on an equals level. So there is a little bit more of that parenting feeling you were talking about.
Yeah, and that's so true. Like, for example, my mother passed away about 8 years ago, and so she's someone that is always, in more of an ongoing conversation. So I definitely resonate with the feeling of our ancestors and our guides, and maybe more of those higher vibrating energies are kind of more of a daily thing. Whereas deities are also very strong, powerful energies that you might not be able to hold those frequencies for long periods of time. And maybe that's why we only invite them in during ritual. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that again, it's staying at the energy range that's right for you at any given time. And you know, I think that working with deities is in an ongoing way is very powerful. But because, you want to develop a relationship with them. Because, you don't go up to a person on the street and say, "Hey, I really need a favor from you." Right? You know them before you start asking for things. And so that's important in one way. I also think that you don't want to bug them. Like, I don't want to be, tugging on Frau Holda's, sleeve every day, going, "Pay attention to me, do something for me," and because, they're deities.
Yes, we're like children when it comes to the gods, in my opinion, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
But in my own journey, I've learned a lot of respect, not just for the nature of reality in the world, but also for myself. And I think that they really teach us how to be respectful of humans, other people, boundaries, how to relate, how to be in right relationship with other humans, even if it's painful lessons that you're undergoing with them before you are sent on your way. Um, yeah, that's so beautiful. Is there anything else, like as far as your overall message in your work that you really want people listening to hear, especially at this time in the world and whatever? I know there's just a lot of people afraid right now. There's a lot going on. It's a strange time to be alive.
Right. Well, I think that, as I said earlier, practice every day. Even if it's short, quick, if you can't do a whole ritual, you can light a candle. Or, if you can't spend an hour meditating, do a walking meditation. Find what works for you and continue to practice it. Know your own energy. Figure out what your energy is so you can understand when there is other energy affecting you and that you're connecting to that maybe you don't have to carry. And notice more, pay attention, because magic is real. We know that it's real. Even stuff that we cannot prove at this point, I don't believe we can prove that spirits are real at this point because scientifically, we don't know what consciousness is and how it works. And until we know what it is and how it works, I don't believe that we can prove that it exists beyond death because we don't understand it. So, but there's a lot that we do understand. And start to pay attention to those things. Pay attention to how you feel when you're walking in the woods or the park. Pay attention to coincidences and say, was that really a coincidence? Pay attention to your intuition and then start to find out what your own strengths are. For me, when I get intuitive messages, they often come in the form of an earworm. And I will think of a random song and it will be screaming at me. And then I'm like, okay, why am I thinking about this? Was I watching a TikTok video that had it, or is there a message here? And then pay attention. If you hear something like someone knock on your door and you go and there's no one there, think to yourself, what could this message mean? Because one of the most important parts of any kind of understanding, of divination, of any of those is your interpretation. Because your interpretation might not be the same a year from now. It depends on what's happening in your life, who you are today, and all of that. So the important things are noticing, practicing, and paying attention, and then interpreting for you and who you are. And I think if you have those things in your magical practice, you can stop listening to people who are talking about generational witches because, for the longest time around the world, it was dangerous to be a witch. So people weren't talking about that. So a lot of people were doing it, and even their families didn't know. So, and it's ridiculous, just because a successful athlete has kids doesn't mean they're going to be professional athletes, right? So, and
Can you
remember,
elaborate? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
well, people that talk about generational witches are often gatekeeping. And they're saying, oh, well, you're never going to be as powerful of a witch as me because the magic goes back generations in my family, right? And it's like, okay, that doesn't mean you're any good at it, right? It doesn't mean that you learned anything good. Everything that we do is made up, right? It's all made up because there was a time before humans. And so there was a time before language existed, before everything. And magic falls under everything. And so it doesn't make anything more valid because somebody made it up a really long time ago. Now, I am not saying don't learn from what others are doing. You know, if you're going to learn to cook, you don't just start throwing a bunch of ingredients into a bowl and hope for the best, right? You go and you get a recipe. So learn, but once you get better at cooking, then you can be like, hey, I'm going to add more butter because I like the texture better when I do. Or I'm going to do these spices instead of what's in the recipe because I like those more. And so then you can start to modify your practice based, like all of the ritual I do individually. I follow the rituals with, the coven, but all of the ritual I do individually has been altered from other stuff that people have said. So yes, go and learn. Learn what lots of people are talking about. Learn what they're saying about different properties of herbs and crystals and what those general understandings are. If you want to do divination, read your tarot first, but then go back and do intuitive readings where you don't use the standard and you can say, I'm looking at this deck, this image in this moment in my life, that's what it means to me. So I think that understanding that we all make all of this up, that's what makes gatekeeping so ridiculous to me. It's like, wow, your insecurity is really showing when you're gatekeeping.
Yeah, and thank you. What I'm hearing from a lot of this is the power of presence, and I think that's the other aspect that I think you're touching on when you mean like be in the moment when you're looking at a card or you're seeing the sign or you're hearing the thing and it's coming in. Really get present in that moment with where you're at right now, and like you said, ancestral work is powerful and beautiful, but it's also not meant to be used as a way to promote like supremacy over
Right,
people.
right.
We're meant to learn from it. We're not meant to use it as a power over. I completely agree. And I actually had a conversation with a practitioner yesterday who shared a little bit about, not all of us are going to have children to pass on our practice to, and not everybody in a specific bloodline wants to practice
Right,
magic.
right.
And so there is that other aspect of do what's right for you, and ultimately it's an inside job to figure out what those tools and what those things will be. Um,
Well, what I
I
think is
agree.
very interesting about this moment in time that we're in, it's much like what happened to folklore. Folklore originally was an oral tradition, right? People would tell stories. Sometimes there would be people that would travel around and tell stories, and sometimes it was all very local. And then came the dawn of the folklorist, where people went around and started capturing stories. But the problem there is most of these stories were from a, white male European perspective. And so when they captured those stories, it went through those filters. And there were female folklorists as well in the early days that were capturing it, but mostly it was wealthy people who had the means to just go around and write down stories. But then those stories became the authority. The Grimm brothers, Anderson. That was the story then. And it got even worse when we got into like the Disney era, where it was the story but sanitized. And that was the official story. But with the internet, we're now back to being able to tell stories to each other. And so those more nuanced kind of details and points of view are getting out there again. And we're, looking at queer people telling stories. We're looking at people who are differently abled telling stories and talking about how important it is to include people that exist in real life in our stories. So I think that it's really a wonderful thing that we can. I go monthly, I go to this thing of storytelling, traditional storytelling, but they have 4 or 5 different tellers all telling it from their own unique perspective. And when you can start to hear the different ways the stories unfold, it's really fascinating. And the same happens with Magick, right? We're talking to each other again. It isn't the, like book. It isn't even the Wheel of the Year, which was created in the 50s by a couple of British guys. And so we have moved away from the expert has the only opinion to everybody's opinion is valid, maybe more valid if you study, right? I'm taking a class in advanced magic right now, and I've been a practitioner forever. And
Mm.
so, but learn what you want to, but then make it your own.
Yeah, and like that was very inspiring. Never stop learning and never stop being a student as well. I think that's also a very humbling message that I've been given many times, and I'm sure, I mean, it just sounds like you've just taken that medicine and really embodied it yourself, that we are always
Yeah, well,
learning.
for me, I get bored very easily. Like, I can't if I have a job for like 5 years, I will be going out of my mind. So I am always cycling back into the novice mode because I'm happiest when I'm learning. Once I've mastered something, I'm like, oh, so boring. Right? So that's just in my nature. And so yeah, I have, and lifelong learning is fun. Like we forget that it's fun because we're always given stuff like mindless scrolling and like make it easy. You don't, and that's very addictive stuff. And so sitting down and reading a book is hard because we're used to consuming in 30-second, like short form videos.
Yeah.
And I heard somebody the other day say, it was about YouTube. I'm in a community, and I have a community that people can join to talk about these things if they want. But I was watching this guy who's an expert on YouTube talking about different ways to get your YouTube to, get people to find you. And he said, so you want to do long form videos, but no more than 8 minutes. Like, what? Is that what's considered like too long? Is 9 minutes now? But apparently it is.
And that's actually bringing up for me, I've noticed a lot of people don't practice magic because it's not comfortable and
Mm.
it takes time and it's difficult and you have to read and you have to learn. And a lot of people don't want to do the work just simply because it's hard.
Well, and it's tempting to just go onto some Facebook group or, some sort of forum and be like, how do I do this? And not do your research and or into even worse, into some sort of AI. And because, AI is often wrong. That being said, people are often wrong. So if you're, getting stuff from a stranger, you don't know if they know what they're talking about. But they go and, these AI tools go and troll the internet and they spew back something, and you never even have to go to the bother of clicking on a website. It's so very different now, and you don't even have that minimal connection with another human being of reading their actual words, right? So it can be really like, again, pay attention.
Absolutely. Have that discernment when you're seeking out sources and also find many sources, look at many different sources, and then also just what feels like what resonates with you, you
Right.
know.
And pay attention. If all the sources that you find on a particular topic lead back to one main source and you can't find anything beyond that, they're probably all just parroting the same thing that this person who might or might not be right said. And so it's nuanced when you're doing research.
Yeah, but I love that you're bringing that up, that it is a part of magic is doing a lot of research. This has been so beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on, Tracy. Is
Mhm.
there anything else? Where can people find you if they want to find you? Where can they find your book? A little bit about your information.
Um, so you can find my book in bookstores, on Amazon. You can also get it from my website, which is called folkloringlife.com. And if you want to buy it through there, I'm happy to sign a copy for you. And ship it right out. You can and you can find everything from that hub. You can find my Substack, where it's again called Folkloring Life, and I write about these kinds of things. And you can find my school community. And if you don't know about school, it's sort of like a Patreon, but you're building a community. So we're having conversations in there every day about what we're talking about here, and there's a classroom aspect to it as well. And there again, I am Folkloring Life. And school is spelled Skool, if you don't know. And it's a really cool place to be. You can find my podcast on any of the podcast platforms that you like to listen to. And that's just called Folkloring. And that's pretty much you can find me on social media. I really don't like Facebook that much, so I'm not on. Mostly I'm on Blue Sky, which is a lot of fun. It's a beautiful community there too.
Blue Sky. I haven't heard of it. I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, it's really
Uh,
nice because you can curate your own feed. You don't have to just get the feed. It's really good.
cool. I'll have to check that one out. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You're such a gift, and
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
just very grateful to have been able to share space today.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
for having me on. I really had a fun time and I felt like we had a great conversation. So thank you.